The pen trembled above the paper as if it knew the weight it was about to carry. "Sign here. It's for your own good," Evelyn Kim whispered, her voice smooth as warm honey, and just as sticky. Steam curled from her chamomile tea like a ghost trying to escape the cup. The old oak table between us bore a long crack down its center, a scar from when our kids were small and slammed it during board games. Now that same table seemed to be splitting under the silence. "Evelyn," I murmured, "what is this?" "Just something to make life easier," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Before you continue, don't forget to subscribe and let me know in the comments where and when you're watching." I shifted in my chair. The house around us was too still, like a museum of our life. Framed wedding photos, the faint ticking of the kitchen clock, the scent of lemon oil on the cabinets. It felt wrong to be holding a pen instead of her hand. Something about the paper felt heavier than it looked. The black title at the top read, "Medical Power of Attorney," not a prescription refill, not a routine consent form. A slow chill crawled up my spine, as if the ceiling fan had suddenly turned on, though it hadn't moved an inch. "Why now?" I asked softly. "Because I worry about you," she replied. Her tone was gentle, but her fingers tapped the table in a sharp rhythm that didn't match her words. I glanced down at the signature line, Harold Kim, printed in neat block letters. My name, my life, waiting to be claimed. It was the first crack in what I thought was an unshakable family drama we had built together. And for the first time in 50 years of marriage, I realized I was afraid to trust her. Why does love suddenly feel like a trap? I have always lived by grids, blueprints, columns measured to the 1/8 of an inch. Even now, at 71, retired and tucked into this quiet cul-de-sac in Phoenix, I fold my shirts by color, pay bills on the 1st of the month, and align my coffee mugs by handle direction. My savings account holds $300,000, not a fortune, but enough to keep the lights on and the house humming. The mortgage was paid off 15 years ago. Order has been my oxygen. And yet last night at that oak table, with Evelyn whispering like a draft under a locked door, everything felt suddenly misaligned. I wandered the house at dawn, slippers brushing the hardwood, the air still tasting of lemon oil. Our living room walls are lined with picture frames, our children's graduations, our 50th anniversary last summer, the day we danced under string lights in our backyard while neighbors clapped. I paused before that photo. Evelyn's smile was wide, her hand clutching mine like an anchor. Had that smile been real? Or just another piece of architecture, carefully constructed to stand while the foundation cracked underneath? "Morning, Dad." Ryan's voice startled me. He stood in the doorway holding a travel mug, his tie already knotted tight. "You're up early." "Old habits," I said, forcing a smile. "Buildings don't rise if you sleep in." He smirked. "Neither do empires." "Empires?" The word landed oddly, heavy. I wondered when our home had stopped being a home and started sounding like a company someone was trying to take over. He left for work, and silence returned. Thick, pressing, like wet cement setting around my feet. I walked back to my study and opened my old drafting drawer. The rulers, the sharpened pencils, the smell of graphite. Tiny monuments to who I used to be. In a world that is shifting under me, they are the only things that don't lie. How did a life so carefully measured slip off its axis? For the first time, I sensed this might not be a misunderstanding, but the first crack in a much larger family drama. One being written behind closed doors while I still lived on the stage. Morning sunlight crept across the kitchen tiles, striping the floor like pale yellow bars. I sat at the table with a bowl of oatmeal, half a cup of rolled oats, a dash of cinnamon, just as I've had every morning for 30 years. The spoon clinked gently against porcelain, steady as a metronome. Across from me, Evelyn thumbed her phone in silence, her tea going cold beside her. "Routine keeps me sane," I said. More to myself than to her. She didn't look up, only nodded. After breakfast, I opened my laptop and logged into my bank app. The familiar blue interface blinked to life, showing the same number it always did, $301,248.17. I checked it compulsively, like a man touching the railing while crossing a bridge, not because it might fall, but because I might. Next came the stack of medical bills. One for $145.67 from last month's cardiology follow-up. Another, $82.10 from the pharmacy. Each bill had my name typed neatly in the upper left corner, black letters on white paper like gravestones lined in a row. I slid them into their color-coded folders. Order calms me. Paper can be tamed, I've always believed, if you give it a place to live. But that morning, as I opened the bottom drawer of the sideboard, something unexpected sat among the neat lines and labels. A manila envelope, unmarked except for 3 words written in Evelyn's looping hand, medical power of attorney. I froze. The words sat on the paper like a shadow that had no source. "Evelyn," I called, keeping my tone even. "What's this?" She glanced over her shoulder, drying her hands on a towel. "Oh, just something for later, in case you ever can't make decisions. I go for annual checkups. My memory tests are fine. Dr. Patel said my score was 29 out of 30 last spring," I replied. Her eyes flickered just for a moment, then softened. "It's just planning ahead. You've always planned everything." Her voice was gentle, but her fingers gripped the towel too tightly, twisting it like a rope. I slipped the envelope back into the drawer, but the order of my world had shifted. By a fraction, maybe, yet enough to tilt the entire house. Since when did love come with paperwork attached to it, like warning labels? It began as a passing remark, the kind of thing you brush off like lint from a sweater. "You've been forgetting things," Evelyn Kim said, sliding her chair back from the table one morning. Her tone was soft, but her eyes stayed sharp on me, like a ruler measuring for cracks. "Forgetful?" I looked up from the crossword, pen hovering over 27 across. "I misplaced my keys once. Twice last week," she replied. "And you missed your dental appointment." "I rescheduled it. That's not forgetting." But her lips pressed together, a quiet gavel. Later that afternoon, she stood in the doorway of my study, coat in hand. "We're going to see Dr. Collins. Just a checkup." I turned from my drafting table, where I had been sketching the window frame of our living room for no reason other than habit. The graphite lines were straight and true. My mind still knew how to build things. "I don't need a doctor to tell me I'm fine. You need someone other than yourself to say it," she said. We drove in silence down East Camelback Road toward Phoenix Medical Center, the sky bleaching white in the noon heat. Evelyn's hands gripped the wheel at 10 and 2, knuckles pale. My hands rested on my knees like obedient animals. In the waiting room, the scent of antiseptic clung to the air. Magazines lay fanned on the table, old issues of Architectural Digest and AARP. I stared at the cover of a 2021 issue, a house cantilevered over a cliff, thinking how even cliffs erode from underneath when no one's watching. Dr. Collins called us in at 12:47 p.m. sharp. His office was too bright, his tie too cheerful. "So, Harold," he began, settling behind his desk, "Evelyn tells me you've had some memory lapses." "She tells you wrong," I said. Evelyn folded her hands, eyes downcast, a portrait of concern. "I just want to be sure." The doctor handed me a small pad. "Draw a clock," he said. I stared at the blank circle, then drew the hands. 10 past 11. Perfect symmetry. Then he asked me to remember 3 words. Apple, penny, table. I repeated them back instantly. "You see?" I said, perhaps too sharply. "My mind is sound." Dr. Collins nodded, jotting something on his chart. Evelyn's face revealed nothing. As we walked back to the parking lot, heat shimmering off the asphalt, Evelyn spoke without looking at me. "I'm not trying to hurt you." "Then what are you trying to do?" I asked. She didn't answer, only clicked the car unlocked, the sound sharp as breaking glass. And somewhere inside me, something small and steady shifted, like a beam creaking under quiet weight. Was this concern, or the beginning of a plan? If this story stayed with you for a moment, support us by liking and subscribing. Every click helps us tell the next one. It happened 3 days after the appointment with Dr. Collins. Quietly, like a hinge rusting in the dark. Ryan Cole showed up unannounced that Sunday afternoon, wearing his gray suit, though it was 90 degrees outside. Evelyn was already at the kitchen table when I came in from the garden, dirt still under my nails. A manila folder lay between them, like a guest no one had introduced. "Dad," Ryan said, rising halfway. "Glad you're here. We've got something to go over." I set down my gloves. "We?" Evelyn poured iced tea into 3 glasses, her movements precise, rehearsed. "Just paperwork, Harold, for peace of mind." Ryan opened the folder. Inside were documents stamped in blue. Power of attorney. The words curled off the page like smoke from a slow-burning fuse. "It's just procedure," Ryan said, "in case anything ever happens." "Procedure doesn't need a lawyer," I replied, sliding the papers back toward him with one finger. "You've always been so organized," Evelyn added softly. "This is just one more thing, like setting the alarm or paying the water bill." But something in her tone snagged me, too even, like a violin string pulled until it's about to snap. I glanced at the signature line, my name printed neatly beneath it. Harold Kim. A life's worth of decisions, reduced to 8 typed letters waiting to be claimed. Ryan leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Look, Dad, if you don't do it now, it'll be chaos later. Courts, delays, all that. We're just trying to protect what you've built." "I built more than numbers in a bank," I said quietly. "I built trust." He didn't flinch. "Trust won't keep the lights on." Silence filled the room, thick as plaster. Outside, a sprinkler ticked against the dry lawn in even strokes, like someone counting down. I pushed back my chair. "No," Ryan blinked. "No? No," I repeated. "Not now. Not like this." Evelyn's face stayed still, but her hand gripped her glass so tightly I thought it might crack. I walked down the hall to my study, closing the door behind me. My reflection stared back from the glass frame of our 50th anniversary photo. How had this home, my safe harbor, become a place where signatures were worth more than love? The folder still lay on the table behind me, waiting like a snare set in the brush. And for the first time, I wondered if this wasn't about my safety at all, but about control. Late the next morning, the doorbell rang just as I was watering the potted ficus by the window. Through the beveled glass, I saw a man in a navy blazer clutching a leather briefcase. Evelyn appeared behind me, lips curved in a practiced smile. "Harold, this is Dr. Collins," she said smoothly as she opened the door. "He was kind enough to come by for a quick evaluation." My fingers tightened on the watering can. "Evaluation?" "Just routine," she said, her voice too bright. "Nothing to worry about." Dr. Collins stepped inside, glancing around our living room as though appraising the furniture. He smelled faintly of antiseptic and spearmint. We sat at the same oak table where the papers had once glimmered under the light, and he began with a notepad balanced on his knee. "Can you tell me what day it is?" he asked. "Thursday," I said, "August 17th. Count backward from 100 by sevens." I did. Flawlessly. Spell world backwards. DLROW. His pen scratched across the paper. Steady, methodical. Evelyn stood near the sink, arms folded, watching me as if I were a specimen. Then the questions shifted. "How many windows are in this house?" I blinked. 21, including the skylight. "What's your daughter's birthday?" "I have 2 sons." He didn't look up. "Who's the president?" "Still the same man who raised my taxes last year?" I said dryly. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Would you sign your name for me?" I wrote it carefully. Harold Kim, in the same neat strokes I'd once used to sign blueprints worth $2.4 million. As I slid the paper back, I caught Evelyn's reflection in the microwave door. She was smiling faintly, like someone who saw the finish line ahead. "Thank you," Dr. Collins said, standing. "That's all for now." I walked him to the door, the ficus still dripping on the tile where I had left it. He murmured something to Evelyn in the hallway. Her eyes flicked toward me, then away. When the door closed, the house felt colder, the silence echoing as if all the air had shifted. I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the faint dent my pen had left in the table's surface. They were measuring me, not for care, but for absence. And I realized, with a hollow drop in my chest, that they weren't trying to help me at all. They were trying to make me a ghost while I was still alive. The shift was subtle at first, like the air thinning before a storm. The morning after Dr. Collins had left, I reached for my phone on the kitchen counter and found only the cold marble surface. I searched the coffee table, the nightstand, even the laundry basket. Nothing. When Evelyn walked in, the sound of her slippers brushing the tile, I asked, "Where's my phone?" She didn't look up from the dish towel she was folding. "I'm keeping it safe. For you." "For me," I repeated, as though the words might reveal their true shape if said slower. "You've been distracted lately," she said gently. "It's better this way." That afternoon, the mail never came. No bills, no magazines, not even the usual flyer for the car wash down on East Indian School Road. By evening, I checked the mailbox myself. It was empty, the inside warm from the sun. The metal smelled faintly of dust and copper. Inside, Evelyn was arranging fresh flowers in the ceramic vase Ryan had given her last Christmas. "Anything for me?" I asked. "Just junk," she said without turning around. But on the counter, I caught a glimpse of an envelope with my name in the corner, postmarked from my bank. It vanished into her apron pocket before I could speak. The next morning, I called the bank from the landline. After 2 rings, the line clicked and went dead. I tried again. The same. Later, when Evelyn stepped out to water the roses, I checked the handset. The phone cord had been unplugged from the wall jack. A hollowness spread through me, quiet and cold. It was like standing in my own house and finding the windows bricked over. In the evenings, the house grew unbearably still. The refrigerator hummed like distant machinery. Even the air felt padded, muffled, as though someone had turned the world down. This house had been my anchor. Now it was a cage with carpeted floors. I sat at the oak table where my name had once glimmered on those documents, and for the first time in decades, I felt small. My life had been built on blueprints, on straight lines and fixed walls. But what do you do when the walls move slowly, silently, while you are still inside them? Somewhere down the hallway, Evelyn's voice drifted as she spoke softly on her phone. I couldn't catch the words, just the tone, measured, controlled, like someone tightening screws. I stared at the dark window pane. My own reflection stared back, blurred at the edges, like I was already fading. How long before they stop speaking to me altogether, and only speak about me? Night settled like ash across the cul-de-sac, soft and gray, and still the house stayed unnervingly quiet. I sat in the living room, the old ceiling fan stirring the air in tired circles, staring at the empty space on the counter where my phone once lived. It had been 4 days since Evelyn tucked it away for my own good, and the silence had become a second skin. No calls from the bank, no letters, no voice from the outside world to remind me I still existed there. A knock came just after 9. I opened the door to find Carolyn Price standing on the porch, her silver hair swept back, a flashlight in one hand. She had been our neighbor for 15 years, the kind who knew the smell of your Sunday roast and the sound of your mailbox closing. "Harold," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "Are you all right?" "I suppose that depends on what you mean by all right," I said. My voice sounded foreign in my own throat. She stepped inside, closing the door softly behind her. From her coat pocket, she pulled out a small flip phone, scuffed at the edges, the kind people stopped making a decade ago. "Here," she said. "It's prepaid. No one can track it back to you." I stared at it as if she'd handed me a piece of my own past. "Why would I need this?" Carolyn's eyes flickered toward the hallway, where Evelyn's shadow stretched faintly under the bedroom door. Because if they decide you're incompetent, she said, you could lose everything. Everything, I repeated. The word sank like a stone. Your accounts, your house, your say in your own life, she added. And you wouldn't be the first. I used to work as a paralegal at Maricopa County Probate Court. I've seen it happen. The fan hummed overhead, and for a moment I heard my heartbeat in my ears, steady and defiant. I have to prove I'm still sound, I said quietly. She nodded. Then start now. Call your bank. Call someone you trust. Make noise before they silence you. I closed my hand around the phone. Its weight was small, but it felt like the first tool I'd been given to dig out of the grave they were quietly building around me. For months, my life had followed straight, predictable lines, until Evelyn and Ryan began bending them in secret. Now I could see it, the faint architecture of deceit hidden in the framework of our days. As Carolyn slipped back into the dark, the porch light caught her face. Tired, knowing, loyal. I locked the door, the click echoing through the still house. Somewhere beyond these walls, my name still belonged to me. For now. If this story touched something deep inside you, please like and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive. The prepaid phone felt almost absurdly light in my pocket, like a toy from a cereal box. Yet it carried the weight of everything I still owned. I waited until Evelyn left for her usual Thursday grocery run. She'd be gone at least an hour, maybe longer if she decided to compare prices the way she always bragged about. I watched her silver SUV pull out of the driveway, taillights winking like red lies, and only then did I close my study door and dial the number I had written on the back of an old water bill. Martin Hale, a calm voice answered after the second ring. Even over the line, his tone sounded like pressed linen. Mr. Hale, I said quietly. My name is Harold Kim. I need counsel. Someone is trying to make me disappear while I'm still alive. A pause. Then, elder law? Yes, and maybe something darker. There was the faint click of a keyboard. You'll need two things, Hale said. An independent cognitive evaluation and a handwriting analysis. If you want to win, you must be silent and precise. The words fit into me like steel beams. We set a time for the following Monday at his downtown office on North Central Avenue. He gave me the name of a psychologist he trusted and a retired document examiner who had once testified in a $12 million estate case. I wrote their names carefully in my leather notebook, the same one I had carried during my years designing buildings, back when people still asked me to create things instead of questioning if I could remember them. When I hung up, the room seemed clearer, sharper at the edges. It was strange how rebellion could smell like lemon polish and old paper. I gathered every scrap I could find: old bank statements, utility bills, the birthday card I had signed for Matthew last April with my usual steady cursive. Proof that my mind was still anchored. Then I opened a fresh folder and labeled it with a black marker. Evidence. Do not destroy. There was a flicker of black humor as I wrote it, the kind of label you'd find on a bomb. Fitting, I supposed, since that's what this would become if handled correctly. Evelyn returned just after noon, bags rustling, humming an off-key tune. I was back at the kitchen table by then, pretending to do the crossword, the prepaid phone hidden behind the radiator. She glanced at me. Quiet day? Just thinking, I said. Trying to keep the walls straight. She smiled faintly, as if she thought the walls were already bowing inward. I smiled back, because in this twisted little family drama, the first person to blink usually loses. The house had learned to whisper around me. Floorboards no longer creaked when Evelyn passed my study, and the doors sighed open instead of swinging. That afternoon, while she and Ryan Cole left for a quick errand, I pulled the small black camera from the false bottom of my drafting drawer. It was the size of a thumb drive, battery charged, lens no wider than a freckle. I placed it between the spines of old architecture books on the shelf opposite my filing cabinet. angled just enough to see the lock and the drawers. Then I closed the study, walked down the hall, and made myself tea, pretending to read the paper as the walls held their breath. They returned at 3:17 p.m. I heard the front door open, Evelyn's lilting voice about traffic on Camelback Road, Ryan's lower reply. The air shifted as their footsteps crossed the house. When my phone buzzed in my pocket, it wasn't a message. It was the live feed. I angled the screen low beneath the table. There was Ryan, alone in my study, gloved hands moving like a surgeon's. He bent at the cabinet, worked the lock with something thin and silver. My cabinet clicked open after 15 silent seconds. He pulled folders free with a kind of reverence, as if they were relics from an empire he was already carving his name into. He slid a thin manila packet from inside his blazer, slipped it among my files, and photographed each page he pulled out. The camera caught the glint of the heading on the new packet. Petition for Guardianship. Harold Kim. I felt my heart tighten, not like panic, but like rage cooling to a diamond edge. They weren't waiting for me to fail. They were building my coffin while asking if I'd like more sugar in my tea. When Ryan left the study, smoothing his tie, I was still at the kitchen table, mug in hand, pretending to squint at the crossword. Evelyn asked about dinner. Ryan smiled thinly, and the smile was the first honest thing I'd seen on him in months. As their voices drifted away down the hall, I stayed seated, the phone still warm in my palm. On the screen, the paused frame showed my own name printed in block letters on that petition, waiting for a judge's stamp like a gravestone waits for the date to be carved. "They've planned my funeral," I whispered to the empty room, while I'm still making breakfast. I began collecting pieces of my own life the way a man trapped in a sinking ship gathers wood for a raft. Each morning, after Evelyn left for her walks or to meet Ryan Cole at the cafe on East Thomas Road, I opened my notebook and wrote down everything. The time she left, the calls she made, the mail that went missing, the precise balance of my accounts, $301,248 as of 8:42 a.m. on Tuesday. Numbers don't lie, I reminded myself. People do. I bought a slim digital recorder for $39.99 from an electronics shop near Camelback Road and hid it inside the hollow base of the old desk lamp in my study. Its tiny red light blinked like a heartbeat whenever someone entered. At night, I played the recordings back with the volume low, Evelyn's voice whispering about timelines and paperwork, just loud enough to slice through the static. "Just trust me," she said on one of them, her tone almost affectionate. "Trust," I murmured under my breath as I listened, "is how they'll bury me." During the day, I called the bank using the prepaid phone, asking for printouts of every transaction in the last 6 months. I requested that future notices be sent to my post office box downtown, an old box I hadn't used since my architecture days, number 2143 at Phoenix, Maine. The clerk didn't even blink. To her, it was just another aging man trying to control what was left of his life. But I knew better. This wasn't preservation. This was defense. Each page I gathered went into the black binder labeled Evidence, Do Not Destroy, the pages thickening like a secret spine. There was something grimly funny about it. Evelyn and Ryan were writing the obituary of my autonomy, while I was building the footnotes that might haunt theirs. In quiet moments, though, doubt lapped at the edges of my resolve. What if no one believed me? What if this whole twisted performance ended not in vindication, but in some quiet courtroom where a judge stamped away my name? I forced the thought back. There was no room for fear now, only structure. And the truth, laid brick by brick. For decades, I had drawn blueprints for towers that kissed the clouds. Now I was drafting the architecture of survival inside the rubble of my own house, trying to hold my mind together while dismantling the quiet deceit that wrapped around me like insulation. The courtroom smelled faintly of floor polish and stale ambition. Sunlight slanted through the narrow windows like searchlights, catching on the brass nameplate that read Honorable Meredith Clark. I sat at the defense table in my best navy blazer, the one Evelyn had given me for our 40th anniversary. It still fit, though today it felt like armor borrowed from a younger, steadier man. Evelyn sat opposite with Ryan Cole at her side, both in black as though attending my funeral early to beat the traffic. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue that never seemed to get wet. When the clerk called the case, she rose as though lifted by invisible strings. "Your Honor," she began, voice trembling like fine china, "my husband has grown confused. He misplaces things, forgets dates, even simple names. He's become unpredictable. We fear for his safety." Here she paused, eyes flicking to me. "And the safety of our finances." It was impressive theater. If I didn't know her, I might have applauded. Martin Hale, calm as a metronome, rose from beside me. "Your Honor, with respect, Mr. Kim recently underwent an independent cognitive evaluation. The results? 98 out of 100. Higher than most of us in this room, I suspect." The judge's eyes settled on me. "Mr. Kim, if you are indeed as sharp as counsel suggests, explain compound interest." The courtroom stilled. Even the HVAC seemed to hold its breath. "Compound interest," I said evenly, "is what turns $10,000 at 5% annual yield into over $70,000 in 40 years. It's also what Ryan here still hasn't quite grasped, which is why he asked me for a loan to pay off his credit cards last March." Ryan's neck flushed the color of raw salmon. A laugh bubbled from somewhere behind me, quickly smothered by a cough. Judge Clark's mouth twitched, just barely. "Noted." Hale slid the evaluation across the bench like a winning hand of cards. "We submit the full report, signed by Dr. Patel of Phoenix Neurological Center." The judge skimmed it, then placed it aside as though it were a napkin she didn't need. "Petition denied. Mr. Kim retains all legal and financial autonomy." For one dizzy moment, the room blurred, not from fear but from relief sharp enough to cut. Evelyn stared straight ahead, lips pressed thin. Ryan stared at the floor. I straightened my blazer. "Thank you, Your Honor." When the gavel struck, it sounded less like an ending than like the first stone dropped into a deep well. And as I walked out, I caught my reflection in the glass doors, still whole, still here, still mine. If this journey stirred your heart, leave a like and subscribe. It's the fuel that lets us keep creating more. They walked out thinking it was over. I know better. Subscribe. The part that breaks everything is still waiting. The courtroom felt colder the second time, though it was the same beige walls, the same buzzing fluorescent lights. This time there were no tears from Evelyn, no trembling voice about safety or concern. She sat rigid at the petitioner's table, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles were white. Ryan Cole sat beside her, adjusting his cufflinks like a man trying to fasten his own nerves in place. Martin Hale stood calmly at our side. "Your Honor," he said, sliding a thick folder onto the bench. "We've submitted the report from handwriting expert Margaret Rios." She examined the power of attorney documents allegedly signed by Mr. Kim. Judge Clark raised an eyebrow. "And?" Hale nodded to the woman seated behind us. Rios rose, elegant in a gray suit, and approached with 3 blown-up exhibits mounted on stiff boards. They showed my signature from the last 20 years, on checks, blueprints, tax filings, next to the signature on the power of attorney. "Note the loop height in the H," she said, pointer tapping the screen. "Mr. Kim's natural stroke averages 4.2 millimeters. The signature on this document measures 6.8. The baseline slants downward 8 degrees, which is inconsistent with his natural rightward incline. In short, this signature is forged." A murmur swept the courtroom like wind rattling blinds. Ryan's jaw twitched. Evelyn went utterly still, the kind of stillness you see in deer just before they bolt. Judge Clark leaned forward, voice flat. So, not only did they attempt to strip this man of his legal autonomy, they attempted to do so with fabricated evidence. Correct, Rios said simply. The judge's gaze cut to Evelyn like a chisel. This is not care. This is coercion. Ryan shifted as if to speak, then closed his mouth, the words dying behind clenched teeth. Evelyn stared at the table as though it might open and swallow her whole. I felt no triumph, only the strange, quiet ache of vindication, a warmth that couldn't quite reach my hands. For months they had tried to erase me, pixel by pixel. Now the screen flickered back to life. As the gavel cracked, the sound was different this time. Not final, not freeing, just sharp enough to draw blood. The judgment came down with the dry precision of a paper cutter. Judge Meredith Clark's voice was calm as she read it. The power of attorney documents nullified, the petition for guardianship dismissed, and civil penalties imposed on Evelyn Kim and Ryan Cole for coercion and forgery, $25,000 each, plus legal fees. There was no drama in her tone, just the flat efficiency of someone filing the end of a story she had no desire to read again. Evelyn stared at the bench as if the wood grain might rearrange itself into forgiveness. Ryan's pen slipped from his hand and clattered on the table, the loudest sound he had made in weeks. I remained still. Years of architecture had taught me how to stand inside collapsing things. When we returned home, the house felt too bright, like someone had switched the bulbs from warm yellow to harsh hospital white. I walked past the hallway where our 50th anniversary photo still hung. Evelyn's hand looped through my arm, both of us grinning like we'd stolen something from time. And went to the bedroom. My old leather suitcase waited in the closet, still smelling faintly of cedar from our trip to Santa Fe 10 years ago. I placed shirts inside without folding them. Socks, notebooks, my drafting pen, the prepaid phone from Carolyn Price, each item a bone of the life I was rebuilding. Evelyn appeared in the doorway, voice low. "Where are you going?" "Out," I said. "This is your home." It was. I zipped the suitcase. "I gave you love. You gave me paperwork." Her mouth opened, then closed. Ryan's voice drifted from the kitchen, something about calling the bank, the sound of a man already calculating how to salvage what was left. As I rolled the suitcase down the hallway, my footsteps echoed. It struck me that family drama often sounds like silence, like the sound of someone leaving while everyone pretends they aren't watching. I paused at the door, one hand on the knob. This house had been my fortress. Now it was only drywall and memories, and I had survived both. The apartment was small enough that if I sneezed in the kitchen, the bathroom said, "Bless you." It sat on the 4th floor of a red brick building 2 blocks from the Phoenix Public Library, its hallway lined with mismatched welcome mats and the faint smell of burnt toast. The rent was $1,050 a month, utilities included, and when I signed the lease, the manager, an old man named Leonard Beck, who wore suspenders like a personal rebellion, said, "It's not much, but it's yours." That was precisely the point. On my first morning, I walked to a corner store and bought a $40 rice cooker. The cashier tried to upsell me a $99 programmable one with 17 settings and Wi-Fi, which sounded like the beginning of a horror film. I told her, "I just want something that knows how to cook rice, not send emails." She laughed. I did too, because it was either laugh or remember that I used to sign contracts worth more than this entire building. Back at the apartment, I unpacked slowly. My drafting pen, 2 framed sketches from my early days, thin steel towers that never got built, a pair of walking shoes I hadn't worn in years. By noon, I was sitting cross-legged on the floor, eating plain white rice from a chipped bowl, and for the first time in months, my heart wasn't pacing the walls like a caged thing. That afternoon, I walked to the library and joined the local walking club. The youngest member was 64, the oldest 89. They welcomed me with warm smiles and the kind of curiosity people reserve for stray dogs who find their way back home. When I told them my name, no one asked about legal guardianship forms or forged signatures, or the word competent, as though it were a rare flower. They just asked if I preferred morning walks or evenings, and if I liked the smell of creosote after rain. As the sun went down, I sat on my new balcony with the faint hum of the city below, holding a mug of tea. The sky blushed orange, then purple. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed. I let the sound sink into me, light and steady. "I'm not lonely," I said out loud, surprising myself. "I'm free!" The world looks different at 6 in the morning. The streets are empty, the air cool, and even the traffic lights seem hesitant to turn red. I walked down East McDowell Road with the library card warm in my pocket, the handle of my canvas bag brushing against my leg. It held nothing but a notebook and a pen, yet it felt heavier than the suitcase I'd dragged out of that house. Maybe because this time, I wasn't carrying fear, just possibility. "I lost the house," I said to the pale light rising behind the rooftops, "but I kept my name." The thought surprised me with its steadiness. That name had been buried under petitions, signatures, clinical whispers. They had tried to reduce it to a checkbox on a guardianship form. Now it was simply mine again, unadorned, unchallenged, quietly defiant. Life is strange that way. One moment you're sketching skyscrapers, the next you're celebrating because you remembered your own bank PIN. In between those 2 points lies the fragile scaffolding of what makes us human. And I had learned the hard way that even in the ugliest family drama, dignity is the last wall worth defending. I passed a bakery just opening, the smell of cinnamon drifting through the door. A boy no older than 7 sat inside with his father, swinging his legs as he ate a muffin. For a moment I saw Matthew there, his messy hair, the way he used to grin when he thought no one was looking. I wondered what he'd think if he knew what almost became of his grandfather. Maybe one day, when he's old enough to understand, I'll tell him, not as a tale of betrayal, but as a warning against quiet erasure. My phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Carolyn Price. "Walking club at 5 p.m. Bring that stubborn optimism of yours." I smiled. Funny how healing sometimes starts with small invitations from people who simply see you, not your paperwork. As the sun cleared the buildings, the city stretched awake around me. For the first time in years, I felt no need to defend my existence. I simply lived it. They tried to sign my life away, but I signed it back to myself. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts about it in the comments. Thank you for spending your time with me today. May you have health, peace, and a family that chooses love over control. And if you're ready, join me next time as we dive into another journey, one where the past doesn't stay buried quite as quietly as people hope it will.